Buff Show on the American Adversaries Radio Network. Matt Buff, your host here, coming to you in a very strange time. And I want to introduce my brother who's on the phone with us today, Daniel Buff, in Arizona, where it's nice and peaceful. Hey, Dan.
Hey, how's it going today?
Well, it's been going pretty good. I don't have the dress shirt on or anything because this is kind of an impromptu show that we're doing because of the recent things that happened up in Minnesota with the arrest of George Floyd, who was taken into custody and then had his neck compressed and later died. And on video, it's a very big tragic thing, but I want to talk about the other aspect of this, which is the rioting, for crying out loud. To me, the rioting is a different story than what happened to George Floyd.
Okay, let's get to it.
Yeah, let's get to it. I'm going to be putting up a lot of images while we're talking here because it's just horrific what we're seeing. The custody takedown after someone is handcuffed, that was horrific to see, I got to be honest with you. And then the burning of Walmarts and retail stores, the looting, the awful video, the videos we're seeing. There's going to be some pretty graphic videos and pictures you're going to see on the show tonight, everybody. But Dan, this rioting simply isn't a response to what happened to George Floyd, in my opinion, because this seems to be a bigger issue. It seems like people are waiting sometimes to pounce upon a city that suffered a tragedy and burn it to the ground. What do you think?
Yeah, this looting and the rioting is all part of something bigger. You got to stay on the subject, though, and it's going to be really hard to do that because we know that these things are part of something bigger. But it's just very simple. You've learned when you were a kid that two wrongs don't make a right. So justice isn't achieved by burning down businesses and stealing goods. No one's going to get a message like that. Civil disobedience is not demonstrated through criminal opportunism. This isn't about morals, justice, or black lives, or anything like that. It's not about high ground. It's about a shakedown. And beating a woman in an electric chair, what does this accomplish? What does it accomplish? Stealing all the weights and treadmills out of a Planet Fitness and all these other things, you know?
That's all for personal gain. And Dan, I want to go and show that video because it's shocking and it's real and it's just a horrific piece of life. Check out the video that we're talking about right now.
Move, bitch!
She got a knife! Get out of here! She got a knife!
She's stabbing me!
The looters who looted Target did this to you? You were peacefully protesting?
I was peacefully protesting and trying to block the way so they couldn't leave with Target told us to stop.
Are you okay?
They attacked me from back, from front and back. They punched me in my mouth, my head. I got punched in the head several times. I got grabbed from behind. People grabbed my wheelchair. They stole my keys. They stole everything they could off of me. I got maced in the face. I got covered with fire extinguisher stuff. I've already seen the EMTs and they told me to go home, but somebody just had milk and that's supposed to help with mace and it's just making my eyes.
So Dan, words can't fathom what we just witnessed right there. When I see stuff like that, it's just the absolute worst of humanity. It makes things seem small.
You know, we hear about what it was like in the days of Martin Luther King. I don't know how much of it I believe. I don't know if he would have been like Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson and just ignored what happened to that woman, or if he would have said, no, this isn't how we're going to handle this, but it seems like these things are just ignored.
Well, what else is being ignored here is something that wasn't ignored on the reopen rallies. All over the country, the reopen rallies were happening, and you had people like Dr. Deborah Burke saying she's completely worried about these rallies and how they'll contribute to the spread of the virus. All over TV, people going to the beach in groups, or people going up to the Capitol in Michigan in groups, where they didn't burn anything, they didn't destroy anything, they didn't uproot lives. People that work at Target now don't have a job to go to because that Target was completely set on fire. But all of a sudden, nobody in the media looking at this huge group, and they call them protesters, but they're looters, rioters, and criminals is what they are. They're looking at them and they're not saying anything about social distancing. They're not saying anything. Was this just a media play, Jordan, with Daniel? My son's middle name is Daniel, so I almost said Jordan Daniel, like to say your full name like I was mad at you or something. But for crying out loud, Dan, all that stuff seems to have gone by the wayside when it comes to social distancing and wearing masks and stuff. They're just talking about how these people are justified almost.
Well, I read, I think it was the Minneapolis Examiner. I think that was the source. I'd have to look it up again just to be sure. But it was an article about the protest and all these euphemisms. They barely even mentioned some of the damage that was done. But they were like, in that article, they said that social distancing measures are frayed right now. That's the one. They're frayed.
They said they're afraid right now.
They're frayed, you know, like jeans getting frayed at the threads falling apart at the end, you know.
Oh, absolutely. That's better than afraid, because that means it's totally falling apart. I mean, I don't see Dr. Fauci down there or up there in Minnesota saying, "Hey guys, we need to social distance." Seems like there's a whole lot of white guilt going on here, Dan.
Well, there's this thing, you know, and I know you're making a good point, and I get your point, but there's this huge thing with the authoritarian left these days where there's rules for one set of people and not another set of people, so you're not going to hear anything. Here's another one. Here's another example that I just came across right before I talked to you tonight, and it's a lot of headlines and articles are saying that the officer that had his knee on Mr. Floyd, is that his last name, Floyd?
Yeah, George Floyd. Floyd was his last
George
name.
Floyd, the officer that had his knee on his neck had 18 prior complaints against him. And now, when the media says that, when they come out with this whole idea that, oh, well, he had 18 other incidences on his record, how many of those same papers will come out and go and talk about Ahmaud Arbery's past record and how many run-ins he had with the law, and Michael Brown and Trayvon Martin's issues that he had on the side? No, the media was showing pictures of Trayvon Martin and Arbery like 4 years prior to when these things happened. You know, like showing pictures of Trayvon Martin when he was like 13 or 14 instead of when he was 17.
Now, did this officer, those priors that you're talking about, those prior complaints, were they racially motivated, or were just across the board complaints about different things?
You know, I'm just talking about the framing of the situation, the headlines, the way it's so manipulative. Honestly, that's mainly what I'm talking about. I didn't go through. I heard that one of these incidences was he shot a guy and almost killed him in a response to a domestic violence call. And this is like something that Occupy Democrat is putting out. So you know, like what kind of source that is. That they're
Not a very good one.
They're very fair and balanced with all their reporting, correct? No.
No, not at all.
So you can basically assume that whatever's coming out about this officer is probably at least halfway a lie.
That's true. We got to vet that. Now, you sent me an article that Ben Shapiro put out there about this guy actually came before Amy Klobuchar when she was in charge of this sort of thing. And she basically let him off the hook because there wasn't after the grand jury testimony for one of these complaints, she didn't see a problem and let him off the hook. Now, is that a slam on Amy Klobuchar? Not really, because we don't know the story. We don't know if that was a legitimate beef or not. I just thought it was interesting that Ben Shapiro kind of was using that as an opportunity to slam one of the top VP picks. But Amy Klobuchar didn't have to worry about being a VP chick. Now, after all this, Biden definitely is going to pick a black woman.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, this is, I mean, if you really want to get into where all this is going, I don't know if you want to stick to, I think we really covered a lot with the riot and philosophy behind it, that it's not necessarily, it's more of an opportunity thing. And we've seen this over and over again. You know, if we want to just stay on track here with the riots, we saw this in Ferguson. We saw this in Baltimore with Freddie Gray. Every single one of these guys who at least contributed to the arrest, like they were doing something illegal at the time that these things happened. I'm not saying that they deserved what happened to them or anything like that, but we can't handle these things with emotions. When we do, we allow the wrong kind of people into our into our situation. So like into our organization. So I see a lot of people, law enforcement officers saying, you know what, these guys are losing the moral high ground that they have in this situation. It's like you don't have the moral high ground if you're out there protesting without the facts. You don't have moral high ground if you're looting. And we've seen this behavior every time. There's something about these movements where there's a group of opportunists that are hiding amongst them.
There seems... Yeah, go ahead, finish.
Okay, well, it seems like they're ready to pounce. There's a lot of hatred that's being tapped into. There's people opening up these wounds. And if you hear the way the blacks in these videos of the riots are talking, they're out for blood. They're out for vengeance. They're saying in plain words, this is what you get for what's going on with the way that black people are being treated in America.
Well, it seems like there's this huge faction of, I don't know if you call them ready-to-go operatives. They're not freedom fighters. But every time there is a situation where it's a racial issue, these guys just always seem to pounce and go, no matter where it is, they go. Because the mayor in Minneapolis said a lot of these people are from out of town. We always hear that when there's these riots. Some city official coming out and saying these guys are all from out of town. Is there a group of people out there just waiting to pounce on a racial situation? I mean, we're seeing the burning of flags, the destruction of private and personal property, the burning of just everything they can. It seems like these things are getting worse. So, Dan, is there a faction waiting for these things to happen, and is it getting bigger?
Well, you have to understand that there are several of these entities. First of all, I missed the speech that Martin Luther King gave, where he said, take their flat screen TVs, that will show them. You know, I missed that one. I don't remember that one. But anyway, maybe it's because flat screen TVs weren't out yet. But
maybe because he was more about a peaceful message?
No, that's not true, actually. During the Civil Rights Movement, that was a tactic to try to antagonize the police into committing violence so they could win over public sentiment. That was a tactic used to provoke violence out of the state. That was the tactic.
But now they're using violence to provoke a reaction, and the cops are just sitting by and watching this. I blame white guilt for this, because if the cops were really doing their jobs, a lot of businesses might have been saved here. I mean, we already had this ridiculous lockdown. We've already had people unemployed, and now they're even more of in a bad situation. If you worked at that Walmart, you can't go back to work now. You're also one of the people out of job now. I mean, they don't realize how many livelihoods they destroy. So instead of trying to incite a violent response from the police, they're starting with a violent response, and the police are pretty much doing nothing. I mean, a little tear gas here and there, but that isn't stopping anybody.
Well, what was the question you asked before that, hopefully you didn't forget, because I kind of changed the subject, and that question that you asked really was important. Do you remember what it was?
I do. It was important. And because I was talking about this group that always seems to show up when there's a racial situation that catches the media's attention.
Right.
These mayors are always talking about these guys are from out of town, and then you see this huge, I mean, it's like there's a group of people out there waiting to burn down a city, and it seems like these problems are getting worse. This mass destruction is getting worse. So is this faction real, and is it getting bigger?
Well, I haven't really done the research on my own, so I can't say that the conspiracy theories that I've heard, that groups like Catholic Charities that were aiding people. Remember when there was all these people that, what did they call it? The caravan. And if you heard that Catholic Charities is funded by George Soros or something like this.
That was the name. That was the name in my notes, Jordan, Daniel. The name in my notes was George Soros.
Okay, well, I mean, I haven't done the research on my own, so I don't know that. But I can tell you this. Organizations like the SPLC, ADL, NAACP, NAACP, that's not a basketball college thing, right?
No, that you're talking about the NCAA.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I got my wires crossed for a second. It's really close in the acronym. Anyway, I'm not trying to laugh about the situation because it's horrible. But you have to understand that these organizations retained quite a few lawyers, and there's all kinds of other work that goes into organizing these things. And if they do want to have like a show of force, if they want to bust people in, you see that they will bust people in to other places. You've seen this happen. It happened. I believe it happened in Ferguson. I don't think it seems like some of these places don't have a shortage of locals that are, it seems like from the crime stats that I've been reading about Minneapolis, it doesn't really look like they needed to bust anybody in to loot that stuff. They already had plenty of criminals locally to choose from. But just getting to the point, back to the point, is that even if there's not a George Soros puppet master billionaire behind these things, there definitely is these organizations that need there to be problems. Guys like Al Sharpton, they need problems to be there for them to stay legitimate, for them to earn that money, for them to find these high-profile cases. I don't know if you watched the Trayvon hoax yet, but you should definitely check that out, because it looks like that was the plan from the very beginning with Trayvon Martin, was to make it as high profile as possible, so that way they could, boost their branding.
Well,
These lawyers and such want to boost their brand.
Well, let me tell you, I was really involved with everything that was going on with as far as viewing the inside of the happenings with the Trayvon Martin case, because I live in Sanford, Florida, and all this happened in Sanford, Florida. We watched those court cases intensely, and it was strange, Dan, because when you're watching the court case, you're seeing facts, right? You're seeing evidence laid out in a description of timelines. And then you turn on the news, and it would be completely different than what you heard in the court case. By the time the verdict came out, there was a lot of upset people, but if you really heard the trial and what happened, how George Zimmerman was really protecting himself, then you would have seen it a totally different way. But just like in every situation, people get skeptical when they see, even though the George Floyd video was pretty evident, people still were skeptical just because they knew the backlash they would get just for being white. And the guy from Star Wars, the black stormtrooper who turned good, he went on this...
O.J. Simpson?
No, not O.J. Star Wars. The new Star...
I'm kidding. I don't care about that either, though.
He went on this huge rant about how he hates racist white people, and here we go again. And these riots aren't doing anything for him. I mean, this doesn't help the George Floyd case at all. When somebody's walking out with a flat screen TV, like you mentioned earlier, this doesn't help with sympathy. All this does is make people more mad, not specifically at black people, but at the narrative. when you're called racist all the time, and I had nothing to do with anything a police officer did in Minnesota, but I've been called racist plenty of times just because I take a different view than people. I mean, eventually you get tired of being called racist, and then you see the looting and the cops not doing anything about it. That really can make people angry.
It actually incentivizes these situations, honestly, because if you look at Baltimore, they gave Freddie Gray's family, I think, $14 million. I might be wrong. It's been a while. But, like, I mean, how much does that incentivize people to just get into these situations?
She gave him that money before, she gave his family that money before the trial was even done.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, like, there's no way. I mean, but still, that just goes into the part that you're saying. It's like, okay, you and I aren't going to sympathize with people that, we're going to look at it and say, okay, well, when you're stealing TVs and stuff, the movement does not seem legitimate to me. But it is effective in Democratic-run cities. For whatever reason, the police back off, and the guys go and burn down the city like a bunch of Luddites and all this. And now we have, now we're in this situation. Jay-Z put out a Trayvon Martin documentary called Rest in Power. And I actually learned a lot from it, but it is totally,
A lot of fantasy land in that one.
But if you can get watch the Trayvon hoax and get Joel Gilbert, the guy that wrote it, on your show, I think you'd be doing yourself a huge favor, because you could watch that trial all you wanted and talk about all the facts that you saw. But if you watch that, I'm not going to ruin anything for you. If you watch that documentary, you're going to find out that probably most of what you even saw in that trial was a lie too.
Well, it was pretty cut and dry, but I'll check it out for sure. Dan, one last question.
It's not as cut and dry as you think. I'm serious. You should watch it.
Yeah, I will, definitely. And that's the Trayvon hoax. Look it up, everybody, if you want to check that out. Also, Dan, one final question. Where do we go from here? Because now, if somebody is getting on to somebody for being in a group, all they have to do is point to Minneapolis and say, you didn't get on to them.
Yeah, I mean, where we go from here is, I would honestly say, I don't know how honest you want me to be about this, but the thing is that this is not going anywhere.
I want you to be completely honest.
Okay, well, as we started the show, we said that this is part of something bigger, correct? We both agreed on that?
Yeah, so let's finish the show on that. Go ahead.
Well, Hillary Clinton said something to the effect is, well, when we restore order, which means they get reelected, something to that effect.
Restore order, huh?
Civility can return. And until November, I think we're in for a lot more of this stuff. I don't think that this is just going to be an isolated incident. I think that anything that can be put out in the news, there's so much outrage culture, there's so much heightened emotions right now, because there's so much on the line. We're talking about if a guy with dementia gets elected in charge of our country, we may never see another Republican in this country again, depending on how much of a fool these guys make out of themselves and people wake up. But right now, they've got everybody primed. All they have to do is flash a picture of an African American on a news report, and everybody's going to get bent out of shape right away. I've seen law enforcement officers doing this. I've seen all kinds of people doing this. So I think that you should probably have a plan. I think that you should be, follow the laws in the federal and state laws and city whatever ordinance laws. But you should have protection with you wherever you go. You should make sure that your kids are. You have a plan when you're going out to places, because I'm not trying to be a fear monger. I'm not trying to be a panic monger. I'm not trying to be emotional about these things. But if you ask me honestly, I think that this stuff is going to be ramping up. It's going to get worse. I don't see a civil war thing going on. I don't see a race war. I might be wrong about it.
Well, you're seeing pockets of trouble, though.
Yeah, I remember when I was in Iraq, when the when the Civil War started with them, you would hear eventually George W. Bush came out and admitted, he's like, yeah, we're seeing signs of sectarian violence, which is a euphemism for, you know, tribal civil war. And, I mean, I wouldn't say that this is sectarian violence necessarily yet, but we see a pattern going on here where every time the news puts out this story, they've got enough people primed. There's enough of a wound in America for them to just pry it open, and people don't need facts. They take to the streets. And I know I'm being long-winded about this. You asked me a simple question, but, like, I mean, we're obviously seeing a heightening up of these situations. And, you know, when Trump got elected for the first couple of years, did Black Lives Matter and then went away. It was completely quiet. There wasn't any of this happening. It happened at the end of Barack Obama's presidency. All of a sudden, Black Lives Matter became...
Well, he gave them a lot of credibility.
What's that?
He gave them a lot of credibility, even in Texas when they killed a police officer. He still said that they're a peaceful group. And yes, then they went away, and we're seeing this T-shirts and...
They killed one police officer.
No, it wasn't just one.
I got 12 police officers. What's that?
Yeah, you're right. I was thinking of the situation up north, but yes, in Dallas it was a lot more than that. But I tell you what, there's a lot of stories about that. I mean, there was just recently a story about an elderly white couple too that was killed by a black person, and there was a nursing home situation where a black person was beating up on an old white person. I hate all this stuff. I hate what happened to George Floyd. I also hate what happened to those other people, because it's not about race when in fact, it is about race in some of these situations, not just with murder, but violence. But to me, wrong is wrong, and what happened to George Floyd was wrong. I know that he was on a criminal charge there. They were getting him for counterfeiting. But these riots...
Not all the evidence is in.
Not all the evidence is in. We haven't seen what happens around the side of the truck. That's the one camera missing. That's the one camera missing.
The news people asked, I'm not going to call them journalists because that's not what's going on these days.
No, journalism means you're going to research it, but go ahead.
They asked one of the top officials there why they haven't charged this officer yet, and they said that there's evidence that shows that he's not getting charged. So we'll see what happens.
I'm starting to hear those reports too. I don't want to speculate about that right now. And in fact, we're going to go and...
You've seen people bend the knee to these things, though. In Georgia, they bent the knee and arrested the McMichaels people. You know,
way after the fact.
Pressure. So we'll see. Very early on, it's hard to speculate on these things right now.
Well, you would agree the mob wants these cops hung in the street right now.
Oh yeah. No, this isn't justice, though.
This isn't about justice. This is not about justice. Looting a TV.
It's a shakedown.
It is a shakedown. That's what it is. And there's a lot of white guilt backing up the shakedown. All right, Dan, thanks for joining the show, buddy. We got to get you back on because we got to get back to Biden. I mean, the guy farted on TV today, and we can't talk about that because half the country's burning right now, apparently. So we'll get back to that. But Dan, you can join me on another segment soon?
Yeah, great. That was a great talk. We'll talk soon.
All right, sounds good. Hey, thanks for joining us on the Buff Show. Be sure to go to AmericanAdversaries.com, click on the YouTube channel, and subscribe to the show. And we'll see you soon. You stay smart out there and really stay safe.